In the beginning, the galaxy was loud. It hummed with the endless chatter of civilizations, a constant thrum in the deep. Stellar empires traded, argued, threatened, and postured, their voices carried on comm relays and hyperspace pulses. For thousands of years, the powerful had decided which weapons could be built and which should never be touched again. The old wars had taught them fear of certain ideas, certain triggers. And in that carefully managed order, humanity arrived, late and small, climbing into galactic stage with hands still callous from building their first slip space drives. The older races saw them as harmless. 10 colonies, barely defended. Ships that creaked under acceleration. Crews that still used projectile sidearms in an age of plasma and particle beams. At first contact, the judgments were quick and unanimous. A quaint, stubborn species clinging to relic technologies. Not worth conquering, not worth allying with, not worth the trouble. Yet humans fought differently when cornered. In minor disputes over mining rights and system borders, they didn't retreat to legal councils or stall for decades in debate. They pushed back, improvising ships from cargo haulers, welding armor from decommissioned stations, fielding weapons that were crude by galactic standards but brutally efficient. And every time they lost, they learned faster than anyone expected. Years of skirmishes bled resources dry. The fleets they faced weren't trying to exterminate them, just to force them into the client state status that most newcomers eventually accepted. Humanity refused. For every patrol destroyed, another was built. For every mining station seized, another appeared deeper in the belt. Eventually, a quiet consensus formed among alien diplomats. Humans were a problem that would solve itself when their industries burned out. They didn't know about the asteroid in the Kepler fringe. It hung in the dark like a shard of dead stone, its surface mottled with ice and pitted craters. Inside, kilometers of tunnels wound through rock reinforced with steel latticework. The diggers who had first tunneled into it were long gone. In their place was a skeleton crew of engineers, physicists, and military technicians who rarely saw the stars except through camera feeds. They called it Erebus Station. Erebus had a single purpose: to prove that certain limitations weren't natural law. The weapon they were building wasn't new. Railguns had been mounted on human warships for centuries. But this was no naval cannon scaled up. It was a planetary spine turned into a weapon. The barrel alone was over 2 kilometers long, coiled with superconducting rails that gleamed under maintenance lights. The coils were cooled to near absolute zero, their housings thrumming with a steady magnetic heartbeat. Every design choice was calculated for one goal: deliver the heaviest possible projectile at the highest possible velocity that the laws of physics allowed without tearing the weapon apart. There were no warheads, no guidance systems, just mass and speed. When you move enough mass fast enough, you don't need explosives. The energy on impact is measured in entire cities, erased in fractions of a second. The lead engineer, known only in official logs as Director E, had come from civilian freight industry. She understood mass the way poets understood language. Every bolt, every plate of armor, every capacitor bank was balanced against a single immutable truth: kinetic energy scales with a square velocity. If they could accelerate their projectile to a significant fraction of light speed, nothing built by living hands could survive the strike. The project was nearly finished when the rumors began to leak. Signals intelligence agents from 3 different species intercepted fragments of encrypted human transmissions referencing Operation Magnet Spear. The phrase carried no obvious meaning, but the context was clear. This was a weapons test. On a listening post orbiting a brown dwarf, a Xyrosi commander studied the decrypted fragments and laughed. Humans, he told his staff, were wasting resources on toys. Everyone knew that past a certain point, projectile weapons were obsolete. Particle beams could track and neutralize incoming kinetic threats. Shields could disperse energy across broad spectra. Mass drivers were relics, dangerous only to unshielded targets. But not all the listeners were dismissive. Far in the Veil Nebula, the Howard Directorate kept its archives close. There, a minor official noted the phrase magnet spear and sent a request for observation drones to be redirected toward the Kepler fringe. The request was marked curiosity only. Erebus Station ignored all of it. On the day of the firing, the crew moved through the final pre-launch checklist with the same detachment as cargo handlers loading a shipment. Every step was automated where possible. The coils had been cooled for 72 hours. The capacitors were charged to maximum safe thresholds. The targeting systems had locked on to the derelict moon fragment, drifting 12 million kilometers away. A voice over the comm read the countdown. At 0, there was no thunderclap, no roar. Sound doesn't travel in vacuum. The discharge was silent. But the station sensors felt it as a tremor through the structure, a bone-deep shiver that rippled from the rail's base to its muzzle. Inside the barrel, the projectile, 3 meters of tungsten alloy tipped with osmium, was slammed forward by a magnetic field that collapsed behind it in perfect synchrony, section after section, pushing it faster and faster. By the time it cleared the muzzle, it was already beyond human comprehension of speed. The impact came less than a minute later. On the derelict moon fragment surface, a flash of light bloomed, not from combustion, but from rock and metal vaporizing instantly. The kinetic shockwave propagated through the fragment, splitting into shards that drifted apart in slow, chaotic ballet. Debris tumbled into the dark, glowing faintly where heat still bled into space. The crew of Erebus Station watched in silence. No one cheered. The calculations had predicted destruction, but the reality was more complete than they had expected. The moon fragment was gone in any meaningful sense. The largest remaining piece was smaller than a cargo hauler. Back in the human core systems, military command received the firing data. Kinetic yield equivalent to several gigatons. Impact precision within 6 centimeters of target center. The test was marked success. Elsewhere, in places humans didn't yet know existed, other signals moved. Along hyperspace relay chains, packets of data flagged with priority codes leapt between worlds. On the listening post by the brown dwarf, the Zeroside commander replayed the footage twice, then locked it away. On the Veil Nebula outpost, the Howran drones adjusted their course to watch the humans more closely. And in the background noise of the galaxy's communications grid, something subtle shifted. Deep space relay stations began logging tiny fluctuations in their carrier signals, so small they could be written off as cosmic background interference. The first hours after the firing passed without incident. Erebus Station returned to idle operations, cycling through cooling sequences and diagnostics while its crew filed precise technical reports. Human fleet traffic continued as usual. Civilian transports moved along their routes. Patrol ships monitored borders, expecting the usual chatter of alien vessels passing through monitored space. But the comms were quieter than normal. Traffic from nearby alien stations slowed. Scheduled patrol beacons were missing from expected positions. No formal declarations arrived. No retaliatory fleets emerged from slip space. No diplomatic warnings crackled across channels. Just less. By the 8th hour, the absence of noise was measurable. Relays that usually carried overlapping chatter from merchant guilds, border disputes, and navigational broadcasts were carrying only routine system telemetry. Civilian news feeds noticed before military intelligence did. Several stations reported delays in receiving off-world broadcasts. Analysts in human core worlds assumed technical faults, perhaps a regional hyperspace relay outage. No one yet connected the change to the railgun test. In the outer sectors, human scouts reported the first anomalies. The mining outpost at Traver. 7 received no acknowledgement to its or shipment manifest from the Vorthen Exchange, a trade hub that usually responded within minutes. Cargo ships arriving at the exchange found its docks deserted. Lights still burned in its vast bays, but there were no workers, no security, no docked freighters. The automated traffic systems guided incoming ships to empty berths and nothing else. The reports reached Fleet Command within the day. They ordered a pause on all civilian travel into non-human systems until the pattern could be assessed. Command expected sabotage or coordinated political maneuvering, but the spread of the phenomenon broke every model. Worlds along 3 separate border sectors went silent within 48 hours, not destroyed, not visibly damaged. Simply quiet. In alien space, the reaction was anything but quiet. The Zyroside government transmitted a classified evacuation order to all assets within 20 light-years of human borders. Civilian liners were rerouted along indirect paths to avoid the Sol corridor. The Valen Union recalled 3 carrier groups without explanation. The Howard Directorate's observation drones stopped transmitting entirely. In hidden diplomatic channels, representatives from multiple powers began exchanging terse, encrypted messages. The railgun footage was in their archives now, passed hand to hand among military strategists and scientists. The yield was greater than most had believed possible for a weapon of its type, but it wasn't the raw force that triggered alarm. The timing matched too closely to an ancient entry in the Consolidated Archive, a record labeled in most languages as the Quiet. The Quiet was not a war. It was an ending. The archives described it without context. Entire sectors ceasing communication over a matter of weeks, fleets abandoning outer colonies without resistance, planetary defense grids left power down. Ships that entered those regions did not return. The only consistent factor in all accounts was the use of mass kinetic weapons on a scale capable of scarring moons and shattering small worlds. For thousands of years, those weapons have been classified under the Kinetic Suppression Accords. The Accords weren't enforced by threat of military action. No one dared to break them. They were enforced by memory and fear. The specifics of what followed the use of such weapons were fragmented, often contradictory, but the result was always the same: silence. When human military analysts finally intercepted fragments of these communications, they struggled to parse the context. The notion that firing a single projectile could somehow cause an entire region of space to fall quiet was absurd. The intercepted phrases, pattern resurgence, quiet threshold, precursor trigger, read like superstition. The data was incomplete, and the aliens who knew more refused to elaborate. Requests for clarification through diplomatic channels were ignored or returned with meaningless platitudes about maintaining stability. The gap between human and alien perception widened by the day. For humans, the railgun was a demonstration of force, proof that they could stand toe-to-toe with powers that dismissed them. For the older civilizations, it was a signal, a warning bell they had all sworn never to ring again. Small human reconnaissance vessels, operating under orders to assess the extent of alien withdrawal, pushed deeper into now unclaimed territories. What they found was worse than empty space. Stations still operated on automated systems. Beacons still pulsed navigational signals. Greenhouses kept their lights on, life support cycled through its routines, and water recyclers hummed. But there were no people, no crews, no signs of evacuation transports on long-range scans. In some cases, meals sat uneaten on tables. Maintenance logs showed tasks in progress that were abandoned mid-step. It was as though every living being had simply stepped away at the same moment, leaving only the machines to keep the lights on. Fleet Command classified the phenomenon as a security priority. Hypotheses ranged from mass bioweapon deployment to coordinated political theater. Intelligence divisions urged caution. Civilian government factions pushed for an assertive response, convinced the alien silence was a bluff meant to intimidate humanity into abandoning the railgun program. The weapon itself remained at Erebus, untouched since the first firing, though requests to schedule a second test began to circulate in internal channels. The intercepted alien data grew stranger. Encrypted bursts between 2 distant powers contained partial translations of what appeared to be warnings. One, decrypted only in fragments, referred to observation from the deep veil and reaction time uncertain. Another contained the phrase gravity-shadow convergence. A handful of linguists traced the terms back to mythic accounts from before the recorded histories of several species. The stories differed in detail, but agreed on one point: something answered when forbidden weapons were used. Even among humans, the rumors spread quickly. Merchant crews swapped stories of ghost fleets seen adrift in alien sectors. Colony networks reported unexplained sensor glitches on deep space arrays. Amateur radio astronomers claimed to detect faint, regular pulses from beyond the galactic rim, pulses that didn't match any known beacon signature. In private sessions, a small number of alien historians broke their silence. They told human envoys that the Accords were not merely a treaty, but a warning passed forward from civilizations long extinct. Once, a species had developed a weapon like Erebus's railgun and used it freely. What followed was not war in any form recognizable today. It was subtraction, worlds vanishing from contact one by one, their physical matter untouched but their energy gone. Entire fleets froze dead in the dark, their drives cold, their crews lifeless. The historians called the force responsible the quiet. They claimed it was not alive, not an empire, but a phenomenon. It did not invade or conquer. It simply arrived wherever the thresholds were met, and stayed until nothing moved. The details defied proof. No sensor logs had ever survived contact. The order to fire again reached Erebus Station with no ceremony. The crew had been expecting it since the first shot. New calculations were uploaded to the targeting array. The chosen target was an asteroid in a distant, slow orbit around a gas giant at the edge of human-controlled space, its movement intended to test the weapon precision under dynamic conditions. Engineers cycled the cooling systems and began charging capacitors. No one on the station spoke of the rumors or the alien withdrawals. When the weapon fired, the discharge was as silent as before, the only evidence a deep tremor through the station's frame. The projectile left the muzzle at a fraction higher velocity than the first test, the result of minor adjustments to coil timing. In less than a minute, the asteroid split apart. This time, the destruction was even cleaner. The fragments drifted outward, scattering in calculated arcs. The first signs of change came almost immediately. Hyperspace navigation relays along 3 major trade corridors began to collapse. Pilots attempting jumps reported sudden misalignments in beacon signals, forcing emergency exits into normal space. Ships that dropped out of hyperspace emerged to find their instruments scrambled, comms unresponsive, and stars subtly shifted from expected positions. In less than 6 hours, nearly an eighth of the galactic relay network went dark. Alien governments responded with urgency bordering on terror. Remaining fleets retreated at maximum speed toward core territories, abandoning outposts and colonies without warning. Automated defense satellites around border systems shut down in precise synchrony, as if to remove any source of detectable emissions. For humanity, the pattern was impossible to ignore. The silence was no longer localized. It was spreading outward in a widening sphere centered disturbingly close to Erebus Station's coordinates. The first disappearance occurred in the Valence system. A human scout ship transmitted its approach vector toward the system's main station. The station acknowledged, updated docking clearance, and then nothing. No further transmissions. Upon arrival, the scout found the station adrift. Lights were dim, power signatures faint, but no signs of struggle or evacuation. Escape pods remained docked. Stores of food, fuel, and equipment were untouched. Life support continued to cycle clean air through empty corridors. Within 2 days, more systems fell silent in the same way. Whatever was happening moved without visible ships, without weapons fire, without negotiation. The abandoned worlds were intact, their atmospheres undisturbed, their infrastructure untouched except for the absence of their people. Long-range deep space arrays began detecting faint distortions on the edges of the affected zones. They weren't gravitational in the traditional sense. Instruments recorded fluctuations in energy density itself, like folds of absolute stillness moving across the background noise of the universe. At first they were points, then lines, then expanding shapes, each one advancing with patient inevitability toward human territory. The alien term translated as the Quiet Ones entered human vocabulary in classified reports. They were not ships, not creatures in any known biological form, but coherent phenomena, entities of absence. They consumed motion, heat, and energy without trace. Shielding, armor, weapons, none of it mattered. Probes sent toward them ceased transmitting when the edge of the effect reached them. On recovery, they were cold to the molecular level, their systems frozen in mid-operation. Most species had learned to avoid drawing the Quiet One's attention. Humanity, in its youth, had not. But unlike the civilizations that faced in the past, humans did not collapse into retreat. Erebus's railgun had brought them here, and some believed it might be the only tool capable of shaping a way forward. Fleet Command initiated Operation Lure. The concept was simple. Bait the Quiet Ones to a location prepared for their arrival, then use overwhelming energy release to drive them back. It was not based on any proven theory. The plan's architects admitted privately that no one had ever survived direct engagement long enough to learn if they could be repelled. But the alternative, allowing the silence to spread unchecked, was worse. The railgun was repositioned toward an uninhabited binary system with a dying star. Surrounding the star was a scattering of automated reactors, each one rigged to overload on remote command. Human fleets deployed decoy emitters tuned to mimic the energy signature of the first and second railgun firings. The first lure shot was fired at a massive hollow rock placing system. Within hours, distortion patterns appeared at the edges of detection range, moving steadily toward the source. The effect was unnerving even in data form, a wall of diminishing signals, as though the background hum of the cosmos were being erased line by line. Fleets withdrew beyond the system's outer edge as the quiet ones advanced. From a distance, there was nothing to see, only the sudden absence of reactor pings, the vanishing of thermal signatures, the collapse of all transmission. At the prearranged moment, the automated systems triggered. The star's outer layers were destabilized, releasing a controlled energy burst that flooded the system with radiation, magnetics, and gravitic shock. Sensors caught only fragments of what happened next. The distortions wavered, folded, and then receded into the void as if slipping between layers of space. Instruments recorded a return of background noise, comm relays flickering back to life on the system's edges. For the first time in recorded galactic history, something had pushed the quiet ones away. The victory was partial. Entire sectors remained silent, their populations gone, their systems abandoned. The quiet ones had retreated from the binary star system, but remained elsewhere, watching or waiting. No one could predict whether they would return, or if another railgun shot would draw them back. In the aftermath, the galactic powers reopened communications with humanity. Their tone had changed. The arrogance and dismissal were gone, replaced by measured caution. They now saw the railgun not only as a threat, but as a potential shield, the one weapon that might both summon and repel the quiet ones. Deals were offered, technology exchanges, mutual defense pacts, shared monitoring networks. Humanity accepted some offers, rejected others. Erebus Station remained active, its weapon maintained at readiness. The railgun had become both a symbol and a burden, a reminder that power came with consequences too large to predict. In classified briefings, analysts warned that the quiet ones might not have been driven back in defeat, but simply moved on to observe from a distance.